I think what's fair to say is that over time, the U.S.-Russian relationship has broken down, and the commitment of the West, not just the United States, but all of the West, to these crucial principles. Will borders be changed by force? Can a slaughter occur in Syria with no response? All these crucial principles of international affairs have been weakened over time by the general unwillingness of countries in the West
no one
to stand
person's
up.
blamed.
No, absolutely not.
All right, no one to blame. You hear that at the end? Chris Cuomo getting in that little with Jamie Rubin, former State Department official and husband of Christiane Amanpour, by the way. No one to blame. And then he went on further in the interview to say, well, you know, so Bush, you know, did bad also, and so you can't blame Obama. No, you know, that was the whole purpose of that interview for Chris Cuomo, to make sure nobody could peg this on Barack Obama at all. Joining us now, ladies and gentlemen, is General Michael Hayden, former director of the NSA, former director of the CIA. And General, welcome back, sir. Pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Steve. Happy to be here.
Well, thank you. All right, so before we get to the particulars of what's going on, I mean, does Jamie Rubin have the read right, or I mean, or is there a policy flaw here that led to Putin doing what he has done, in your view?
Well, you know, Jamie was right in some of the things he brought up. There has been inattention to some things happening in parts of the world. Now, there's been a lot of focus on Syria, but with regard to the Ukraine, Steve, I think it's fair to say we Americans are kind of late to this party. I mean, the European Union folks were talking to the Ukraine about a plan towards accession and some sort of membership relationship, but we weren't very prominent. In fact, you know, when we had that rather profane phone call from one of our assistant secretaries, intercepted probably by the Russians and made public.
When she used the F word, right? When she used the F word?
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually heartened. At least there was somebody in our government paying attention.
Yeah, no, that's very true. All right, let's talk about what took place yesterday. We had John Kerry announcing a deal of sorts between the so-called rebels and the Russians in eastern Ukraine, and then the president was asked about it shortly thereafter at a press conference, and he said that you know, he's not putting much faith in anything right now in reference to that agreement. So what was accomplished, if anything, do you believe, yesterday, and was too much made about it by Kerry and the media?
Well, let me associate myself with the remarks of the president. I'm very skeptical. And I do not believe that those things going on now in eastern and southern Ukraine, the occupation of buildings, you know, kind of the smooth, almost professional occupation of buildings by Russian speakers, I don't believe that's just happening out of spontaneous combustion. That's the purposeful action of the Russian Federation. Now, you get this agreement yesterday. Fine. It probably does no harm. But I don't know that it changes much on the ground, right, Steve? Today's news is those guys aren't leaving those buildings.
Right.
It might give the Russians, the government in Russia, a little bit of a fig leaf where they get to say, you see, it's not us, it's them. But boy, this just bears the fingerprints of how they've been operating. It's a carbon copy of what they did in the Crimea. And so I think this is the Russians' kind of table stakes in the negotiations, Steve. Their ability to cause trouble, that's what makes our Secretary of State fly to meetings with Sergei Lavrov.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, let me ask you a question. Elliot Abrams was on this show the other day, and he said that, and along the lines of what you just alluded to, I believe, he said that he thinks it's a mistake for Obama to be entertaining Putin or making the calls or taking the calls from Putin. You know, they've had several of them. And he said you don't have those kinds of calls, you know, unless there's something good going on. But it seems like every time they hang up the phone, you know, whether immediately or a day or two later, there's more provocation and more aggression by Putin. So, you know, are these what good are these phone calls doing?
It does. I think Elliot's right. It does make us appear to be the supplicants here, which is not a good position for us to be in. And frankly, I mean, when you see folks with our kind of background, Steve, talking about this now, they're actually calling for more robust action on the part of the United States and maybe a little bit less rhetoric. Not these targeted individual sanctions against Russians, but broad sector sanctions against Russia. I think, just quietly letting it known that an American military planning team has arrived in Kiev to help the Ukrainians, not with the promise of American troops, but to help the Ukrainians organize their own defense. And I wouldn't be above, Steve, beginning to announce that we're going to have, we and our NATO friends, a little more permanent military presence on the ground in some of the NATO states in Eastern Europe, like the Baltics and Poland and Romania. I mean, the Russians have to understand actions have consequences, not just words.
Putin's poll numbers, again, I don't know who's doing the polling, after all, it is Russia, but allegedly his poll numbers are up, 20%, even though, supposedly the economy there is suffering. Putting all that in, taking all that into consideration, what is Putin's end game here? I mean, has he succeeded in eastern Ukraine already? I mean, basically, is that now a fait accompli that, he's diverted attention, he keeps diverting attention, but he's succeeded in what he wanted to do, and now there's no going back there either? And how far do you think he intends to go?
Well, certainly his seizure of the Crimea is a fait accompli. I mean, that is, it's interesting. Steve, we had this big conversation yesterday, didn't we? 3 or 4 countries represented, the European Union, ourselves, the Russians, the Ukrainians, and Crimea wasn't even brought up. He has taken that card. He has pocketed his winnings from that hand. The Crimea is going to be Russian going into the future. And frankly, Steve, you have to understand, Putin isn't just making this stuff up and imposing it on the Russian people. They have a deep sense of historic grievance here over the past quarter century. And one thing you can say that Putin has done, as you suggest, he hasn't restored the economy. He certainly hasn't restored democracy, but he has restored a bit of Russian pride. And that's why he's doing this. His legitimacy as a ruler comes from that very fact, that he's been able to do that for the Russian people. That's why I think it was fairly predictable that he would act in the Crimea. Now, Steve, the eastern Ukraine's a little different. That's not going to go down easy. That's not going to be bloodless. If he sends those motorized rifle regiments across that border and seizes territory, he can do it, as General Breedlove, the Supreme Allied Commander, said. He can do it in 3 or 4 days. Staying there is another matter. And if he's doing this because of Russian pride and Russian prestige and his personal prestige, the last thing he wants is an occupation of the eastern Ukraine with Russian soldiers coming home in body bags because, Steve, the Ukrainians have a rich history of attacking their occupiers.
Let me ask you, sir, very quickly, what about these reports of Jews, the posters that are out, the leaflets that Jews have to register in that town in Ukraine? Russia says they have nothing to do with it. Nobody's really claiming credit for it. It was talked about by Kerry. Our ambassador reportedly confirmed these leaflets. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, horrible on its face, isn't it? That we're witnessing this in the 21st century and doing it at Passover, which is even worse, at least for the atmospherics. I don't know who did it, but it certainly shows kind of the depth of the passions that are pent up in that part of the world, and with which we are now forced to deal.
Yeah. General, have a great holiday weekend, sir. Happy Easter to you, and thank you for your time. We look forward to speaking with you again.
Thanks very much, Steve. Good talking.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
General Michael Hayden, ladies and gentlemen, former head of the CIA, former head of the NSA. Very interesting. And yeah, Putin, could you imagine what those conversations are like? Ralph Peters had a great interpretation of what he thought those conversations between Putin and Obama were like. Obama would say, please, don't roll me anymore. And Putin said, maybe I will, and maybe I won't. Okay, thank you, sir. And they hang up the phone. All right, we're coming back with Gimme 5 on the Steve Ballsberg Show on Newsmax Television.